So I'm going to talk about the short story The Man Who Loved Flowers, written by Stephen King. And the story is about a young man who is in love with a woman named Norma. And on his way to find her, he meets other characters on the way, such as the old lady who thinks that he is in love, and the old flower vendor who helps him pick out flowers for Norma. And on his search, we find a lot of dark events and a lot of foreshadowing elements. And in the end, we also learned that when he finally finds Norma, which is actually not Norma, we learned that the young man is actually a serial killer. And you can separate this story into three parts, where you have the beginning, middle, and ending. And in the beginning of the short story, there is an exposition where it makes the reader familiar with the context of the story and with the protagonist. The action takes place in New York in 1963 during a spring evening, as you can see on page 1 in lines 3 to 5. And the darkening air functions as a first foreshadowing element, suggesting that the character and the plot are going to have a dark development. Also, already from the beginning of the short story, we are being misled because the story describes a serene atmosphere and a man who is in love. And in the middle part of the short story is where the rising action and the climax appear. The rising action follows the man during his walk through the city from other characters' point of view. At first, there seems to be no tension in the short story at all, as you can see on page 1 in line 17. But the whole smile on the young man's face, it is a hint that something does not seem quite right. Also, when presenting the flowers sold by an old vendor, the reference to carnations on page 1 in line 19 can be another hint at the dark end of the story. And also already now a rather dark atmosphere has been implied. And the most obvious foreshadowing element is the news broadcast on the flower vendor's radio, where it goes, "A hammer murderer was still on the loose, and unidentified women had been pulled from the East River," where in the end of the short story we find out that the young man is actually the hammer murderer. And the climax is reached when the young man gets angry upon realizing that the woman he just met is not actually Norma, and then takes out his hammer and kills her. And in this moment, we also get to know that Norma has actually been dead for 10 years, as you can see on page 3 in lines 34 to 35. And in the ending, we have the falling action, where the man leaves the dead woman and starts heading back, as seen on page 4 in lines 2 to 4. And the dark protects the man, as nobody can see the bloodstains on his clothes. And the fact that the man calls himself Love and is determined to find Norma suggests that he will continue to kill other women. And the ending of the story is open, as we do not know where the man is heading, or if or who he is going to kill next, or if he is ever going to be caught. And the man's outer characterization reveals that he is a good-looking guy, but not necessarily what people would call beautiful. And that can be seen on page 1 in lines 10 to 12, where he is dressed in a light gray suit, has dark hair, and it is cut short, and his complexion is fair, and he has light blue eyes. And the man's inner characterization seems normal and innocent at first, and we just think that he is a normal man who speaks to the flower vendor, and he's just a young man who is in love and wants to buy flowers for his lover. But as the evening turns into night, the man's attitude changes from light to dark, When he meets the woman in the dark alley, his inner characterization reveals that he is actually a murderer. And the short story is a third-person narrative and has multiple point of view, and the narrator is being explicit when he directly describes the setting or the characters, as he does on page 1 in lines 3 to 5. And the narrator is also implicit because he has access to all the characters' thoughts and feelings, and also uses their point of view. For instance, the narrator knows the old lady's thoughts while she's looking at the young man walking down the street, as you can see on page 1 in lines 12 to 13. And the narrator also has insight in the old flower vendor's thoughts, as you can see in page 1 in lines 40 to 41. And we mostly get to know the young man through his actions and through dialogues, but after the murder has been committed, the narrator uses the young man's perspective, and it's the use of the young man's perspective that helps the readers understand who he really is and how appearances can be deceiving, as you can see on page 3 in lines 36 to 38. And themes and messages, or message. To begin with, we get a feeling that this is a love story, and that the theme therefore is based on love. It feels very romantic, and the story focuses on what it feels like to be in love, but as the story continues, the atmosphere turns darker, and the whole love scenario is being turned around once a young man murders the women in the alley. And the theme could be insanity or evil, since he has already killed multiple women, and will most likely continue to do so in his search for the love of his life, which is Norma, who is dead. And the story can be related to the article Bad or Mad, written by Sean Spence. We do not know if the main character in the short story is actually evil, or if he is just mentally unstable. And this is what Spence debates in his own article, whether some criminals can be considered evil or if they're just influenced by natural factors such as mental abnormalities. And it could be interesting to look further into this and debate, with the help of this article, whether or not the main character is intentionally being evil, or if he is just mentally unstable. And all in all, the message of the story could be that traumatic events such as the loss of a loved one can lead to extreme psychological distress and changes, as the protagonist turns into a serial killer from this. And other messages could also be that appearances can be deceiving, and that people can be blinded by nostalgia. So yeah.